Hello and welcome to the Valiant Growth Podcast. My name is Philip Frey, and today my guest is Nick Hazelton of the anarcho-yakitalism podcast. Nick, it's nice to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's an honor to be on. I've listened to a few of your episodes, Philip, and I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I can say the same about you. The reason why I brought you on the show, Nick, is I think you have one of the coolest stories out there as far as starting a podcast. So the moment I discovered you through an interview through someone that I really like, and I said, "Hey, let's look into this guy." So I go to the website. Turns out you started the podcast when you were 15. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Well,
it is.
that's so cool. I mean, were it nothing else, that alone would make an amazing story. And now you're at episode number.
I believe it's 84 this week was 84.
So you kept going with it.
Yes,
So can you tell me the story behind that? How that happened?
sure. I've been interested in politics since I was around 12, I think. Started getting into political philosophy and I started studying it, and I kind of started out as a libertarian because of influences from my family they were libertarian leaning. So I kind of adopted that term because my dad used it once. Thought, oh, that's an interesting thing. I'm just going to call myself a libertarian. I looked into it more as I got older. And by the time I was 15, I started the podcast. I had found a few uh, other media sources who were promoting anarcho-capitalism, which is basically libertarian anarchism. And so I kind of adopted that, and I kept studying it more, and I was really into it. And I thought, well, I would love to do something with this. I started writing a blog, but it wasn't getting many people interested. And one of these days I decided I'm going to call into one of my favorite shows, which was the Freedom Fiends. And at that time, Michael Dean from the Freedom Fiends had branched out and he was doing like an actual radio show, a live radio show on some stations across the country. It was just a few at that point. Um, I really liked listening to them. They're talking about regulatory agencies or something like that. And I called in because I thought, well, I have some input here, and I kind of want to talk to these guys. It was Michael Dean and his one of his co-hosts, Lusander Fiends. I called in and talked about how you could privatize regulating certain things. I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically I was saying you could privatize these regulatory agencies and it'd work out just fine. In fact, here are some examples of like the underwater or underwriters laboratories, I believe is what it is. They review a lot of products, and it means something to have that stamp on there, that underwriters laboratories stamp on your product. So I was sort of talking about that, and the guy was like, well, because I knew one of them. I'm hoping that I'm not rambling the story too much,
No,
but
no, no. It's
basically,
great.
um, he asked me how old I was. Michael did, and I told him, well, I'm about 15, and he said, wow, I really like what you're saying, kid, but you sound terrible, because I was calling in on my home phone. And so it just sounded terrible. And he's like, I love what you're saying, but you need a better microphone. I have this extra microphone. I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to help you start up a podcast. And so just out of the blue, I had no idea that this was going to happen. So he's like, okay, I'm going to help you start up this podcast. We got in touch. So we were talking. We kind of figured out how we're going to do this. He said, you got to come up with a name for it. And I had been raising yaks at that point for, I don't know, maybe a month. And he said, or I decided, well, I got to make this a pun on yaks. I got to make this, something clever like that. And since I was a narco-capitalist, I came up with the term anarcho-yakitalist. And so that is how the podcast was named and started. Michael Dean helped me out all the way through. And now I'm a co-host on that same show, The Freedom Fiends. I probably am on about once a week, I think.
You must have made quite an impression calling in to have gotten him as a mentor. Do
Mm-hmm.
you is that show publicly available actually?
Mm-hmm.
Where you called in?
I think it is. I have not gone back and listened to it in a long time. It's been on my mind. I should probably go back and find it because the Freedom Fiends have a very deep archives. There's about I think almost 7 shows a week. So that show has been buried a long time ago, since it's been about 2 years. But I'd like to go find it at some point.
Yeah, well, if you If you do, I'll share the link, or at least I'd like to listen to it just to see. I mean, I really believe you did make an impression, right, on them.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he gave me a free microphone, so I'd like
Yeah,
to
I
think
mean,
that. Yeah.
that's something. And I never addressed this on the show so far, and it's kind of the show is not focused on politics, but it's something that, yeah, I wanted to discuss at some point, anyways. And I share the same philosophy with you, Nick. And I'm also an anarcho-capitalist, and my way into it has been through government education.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was studying economics, and I had this professor, and he was kind of a lone star in that department, in that he was really into free markets and Austrian economics, and befriended the guy, and he said, "Hey, you want some books? I will lend them to you anytime." So I think I picked up, the first thing was Free to Choose from Milton Friedman, and then gradually I got into Austrian economics and all of that happened. But it was very relevant to me at that time, given that I was studying economics. So I just considered it as part of my education. I'm curious what set you on this path, and how was it relevant to your life when you discovered it?
Um, well, so I was interested in politics, and I kind of realized that government's a big problem. It often hinders people from doing what they want, and it gets in places where it doesn't really belong, and really messes up things, both for people's personal lives and also in the economic sectors, right? And so I kind of realized that at a young age because I was studying that stuff, and I had these influences from my family, who was my grandfather and my great uncle, and then my dad are they were pretty right leaning. My father was probably a little bit more liberal than my grandfather and my uncle, but they would talk about these ideas, and I kind of picked up on it, so I was kind of brought up in that, and then I kept studying it more and more, and I was starting to realize, well, what's going on in the world kind of matters. At a young age, I just decided, well, I should be up to speed on these things. Like I want to know what's going on, so I started reaching out, or not reaching out, but I started looking for some news sources, and I kind of realized that the mainstream media like CNN and whatever else is out there, I didn't really enjoy it, and I didn't think that it was talking about the things that I wanted to hear about. And so I looked up on my TuneIn app on my iPod. I looked up freedom or liberty or something, and I found the Freedom Fiends, and that's when I started listening to them. And then I also found the Liberty Radio Network and a few shows affiliated with them. And the Freedom Fiends is affiliated with the LRN, Liberty Radio Network. And I think I found Free Talk Live, and maybe through the Freedom Fiends, I found the Bad Quaker podcast by Ben Stone. So that was kind of how I got into it. Found those guys, and I listened for a few months, and kind of realized, I'm not just a small government libertarian, I'm actually an anarchist. And so I started thinking, okay, and I just kind of jumped into it from there. And it's been I don't know, it's been very interesting to be part of this, you know, small fringe political movement, but it's definitely fun, and it's definitely been yeah, my beliefs have changed very much since then, and I've gotten more deep into philosophy and stuff like that. But it's a very different outlook on politics than what most people are used to. So I mean, I guess it's been very beneficial to me, I think.
Yeah, yeah, to me as well. And I'm planning on making a podcast in the future about this, and how it connects to personal development. I've come to the conclusion that libertarianism is really the only political philosophy that's truly congruent with growth as a person, because it focuses so much on the individual and on individual responsibility, and I would say even self-esteem and hard work. And I believe those are all values that are absolutely necessary for someone who seeks personal development. And also it rejects honored authority, which again is very important. And it kind of can be an easy an easy first, well, step. I don't know how easy it is actually, but um, you you become more skeptical when you realize that everything you've been told about the government is a lie, and that opens up a lot of other avenues of exploration, and you will gradually look into things that are even more difficult to accept because you've built some resistance to that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And as I've been, since I've adopted anarchism as a political philosophy and I've been studying it more, I think that it's really contributed to me being more skeptical. I think you're exactly right. I think that's a great observation. I started looking at religion after that, and then I started getting into philosophy a lot deeper than politics after that too.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of growth simply comes from questioning the values that you've been presented with and kind of the virtues that society espouses, and then realizing that they're toxic to your mental health, and often it's perpetuated by people who, well, don't want you to get healthy. So on the subject of government, I saw that you dropped out of high school. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. I have.
I think that's really cool, but can you tell me more about that? I'm not sure everyone realizes the value in that.
Sure. I guess when I was in school, I was in high school for a couple years, and during my freshman year, I kind of realized that I did not enjoy school at all. I mean, every kid kind of knows that school sucks, right? Nobody really wants to go to school in the morning. But I realized that I didn't really enjoy being there at all, and I was listening to, more libertarian shows, and they're all, a lot of libertarian anarchists are pretty skeptical of the school system itself, right? And so I understood the issues with it. I understood, okay, this could be done a lot differently, and I had some ideas of how we could fix it. But, being a student, you don't have much pull in how things go in the school system, right? I don't have much of a say in that. So, but I kind of realized I didn't like it, but I felt like there has to be some value in this. I need to go to college and get a job. Otherwise, I'm not going to make it in life, right? I'm not going to be able to sustain myself if I don't go to college. And for that, you need a high school diploma. And I started realizing that actually was wrong. You don't need a college or a high school diploma and a college degree to make it in the world. And I kind of realized that I guess I found a path that didn't require a high school diploma or a college degree, which was agriculture. And I had really enjoyed working with animals in my childhood. I was in a 4-H program, so I was raising lambs and steers before. So I kind of realized, okay, I think I want to do this. And then I started listening to a podcast called the School Sucks podcast. I don't know. Are you familiar with that, Philip?
Yeah, I love that podcast. That's a very good podcast.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely my favorite. And so I was listening to that and I kind of realized, okay, no, maybe I really don't need to go to school. But I was still kind of scared and I didn't really know. And I knew that my parents said that, they're like, no, you have to go to college. There's no way you're getting out of school, right? And eventually I called into a show called Free Talk Live. I talked to Brett Venant of the School Sucks podcast. I also talked to Ian Freeman of Free Talk Live. And I was talking to him because I was like, oh man, I want to get out, but I'm not sure I can. And so I was talking to them and they're like, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do, Nick, but it sounds like you have this idea with yaks. Go for it. And so I thought, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to do that. So I started pushing to get out of school because I knew that school was just holding me back. And I wasn't getting anything valuable out of it because at that point I had started the podcast, I believe. I started the podcast the summer after my freshman year, and I was getting a lot of value out of it right away. And so I kind of realized this is great. I can do this while I do my agriculture ideas, work on those businesses, and I'll be able to be fine. I can learn and I can make money. So I just kept going at that, and my parents said, no, you can't get out of school yet. So I kept going, and I was doing pretty well in school up until my last semester of sophomore year. I was a 4.0 student up until then, and that was the point where I decided I'm done. Like I don't want to stay here. either going to drop out or fail out. And so it took a while to convince my parents to let me get out, but I did that last year, or I guess this year now. If last September I would have started my junior year in high school, but instead I didn't come back, and I've been doing my own self-directed learning with the farm and the podcast, and whatever else I can do, just learning on my own. So that's what I've been doing since then, and it's been a very large benefit. There's no way I could have been at the point where I'm at with this business and the podcast if it were not for me being out of school and having the time to work on the business and the podcast.
Yeah, and I share a similar experience with you, although you beat me to it. I I dropped out of second year of college. But let me ask you this. So, what is the problem with public education? I mean, surely you're gonna fail completely if you don't finish it. I mean, I know you're probably lucky you have 1 or 2 years left, but then it's going to be a massive failure, right?
Sure. Um, yeah, that's an argument that people will make, right? And it's interesting because for a while it seemed that a college degree was super important. Baby boomers. I don't, I, I don't study much about European culture, so I don't know what generations look like over there. But here in the United States, at least, um, uh, where you can see these different generations, and a couple generations before my own. I guess I'm a millennial. People were really pushing go to college because this is how you're going to get a good job. These degrees matter, and for a while they absolutely did. Um, but as we're kind of seeing now, they've become extremely expensive, and people are not getting the jobs related to their college degrees. Like up to a master's degree, you can't even get your job based on whatever you studied, right? So some do, like most. I guess I don't really know. I'm sure that most, or maybe not most, but at least some people do get their jobs depending on what their degree is. But as we're seeing more and more, that's happening less and less. People aren't getting the degrees, or not getting the jobs that they have their degrees in, and they're just piled with student debt. So they don't have any money, and they don't have good jobs. So if you look at it, who is being successful here? These people aren't really having much monetary success, at least. But if you look at some of these entrepreneurs who are making a lot of money, maybe not a lot of money, but they're making enough money without using the degrees that that they might have, or if they didn't go to college, they don't need them. Right. So I've watched these people like I guess I can name off a few. Kevin Geary of the Rebooted Body program and podcast. Brett Venant is the podcasting sort of thing. Curtis Stone, and there's a lot of other farmers, right? These people are making money without using any of the education that they got from the government. So it's just not necessary, as people are being shown. And looking at it realistically, it's just not that valuable to have these degrees anymore. It's obviously true if people aren't able to get, the jobs that they have in those degrees, and if they're piled with student debt. That's at least my opinion, and that's what I'm seeing. And I think that people are going to start realizing that pretty quickly in the near future.
Yeah, and I would add to that the internet has kind of made the whole model obsolete. But as far as I can see here in Europe, it's still in full swing. I think there are more people in universities right now than there have ever been before. But let me take a hypothetical situation here. So here in Europe, higher education is usually quote unquote free. So as a student, you don't pay for it. So let's say that I have a listener, 18, 19 years old, and he could get this education for free, and all he or she would have to invest would be the time. Why do you think, or do you think that there are better alternatives? And if there are, why is that? And what are those alternatives for education?
Yeah, sure. I think it's important to realize, and I have to watch myself sometimes, and trying not to speak for every situation and everybody. I mean, there's definitely a possibility that going to school is going to be a net benefit for you. I'm not totally sure. Only you can really decide that. But in my opinion and in my experience, I guess it wouldn't be valuable for me to spend any time, even if I could get it paid for, right, to go to college, because I have this business idea. I want to work on that, and a college degree really isn't going to get you the experience in business um, as much as starting a business and making it work and talking to other entrepreneurs. Um, you're going to get much more out of it just by learning via your networks and the internet than going to school, listening to a professor, somebody who has spent so much time in academia, not in the workforce. Uh, they're not going to have as much valuable information as somebody would who's actually done it and is making their own business work. But that would be what I would tell people is if you want to start a business, don't go to school. You don't need that. You can do that on your own. But in some cases, I think it might be valuable to go to school. But I would just encourage people to look for alternatives. And my alternatives that I would say would be starting a business, taking online courses if you can. Like there's things like the names are totally I'm totally blanking on the names of some things that I'm thinking of, but I think one of them is Praxis. So I can't remember. Hopefully I can remember later. Maybe we can put it in the show notes. But there's people who are out there creating alternatives right now, and you can find them if you really look for them. If you're tapped into these sorts of you know things, looking for alternative education plans, right? They are out there, and for higher education, I think there are not as many. Like with a high school and younger age, there are homeschooling and unschooling techniques and platforms, I guess. But with higher education, I think it is a little bit different, and I'd be curious to hear what you would say. What do you think the alternatives are? But for me, I do think that they're out there, and I think that people can just look for them. And if you're an entrepreneur, definitely stay out of school. If you want a job that's like an engineering job or something, you probably should go to school. But that's not my decision to make, I guess. So, but yeah, I'd love to hear what you think are some alternatives to higher education.
Yeah. Well, my best alternative to higher education, and actually the reason why I dropped out, well, the reason why I dropped out was that we had a list of books to read. And I kind of realized that when I'm sitting at home or in the dorm or wherever, and I'm actually reading the book from the expert, I'm gaining a lot more value in that time compared to when I'm sitting in a classroom when it's someone with usually no free market or any kind of business experience, often just repeating the same ideas except less well.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, like, what's the point? Like I was traveling, I think 30 or 40 minutes to get to the university. I was just thinking if I just read a book in that hour that it takes me to go there and get back, I will have learned a lot more than actually I will learn in the however many classes I would have that day. And this is I'm talking of business education specifically here. There are so many great books out there, and it's basically industry leaders writing about their experiences and kind of the frameworks and knowledge that they've piled up, that there's just not much point of spending all the time and all the resources. I mean, even if it's quote unquote free, even if it's government funded, you're still gonna usually have to pay extra to get the accommodation. You will have less time to work. In Romania, where I'm from, most people don't work during university, so they kind of see it as something that comes after university. So you're giving up a lot, and you're not getting a lot in exchange. And when it comes to the internet is a great way of finding books. But other than that, there's a slew of podcasts. There are There's Coursera. I'm sure you know Coursera.
Yes.
It's it's pretty close to the university experience insofar as it's developed by university staff, but it's usually some of the best universities. So unless you're going to, whatever, Stanford, you're probably going to get better content online than what you're going to get at, at your university or college. I keep saying university because that's the word that's, it's in Romanian. I kind of, college never made sense to me. It's the same institution. You get all your education for like the undergraduate, graduate in a university. Yeah. So, and also finding mentors and actually working in the industry. Like if you're not a book reading type, or even if you are, you kind of have to balance it out. You can get so much further than staying in classes. Like whether you get hired at whatever the legal hiring age is, or right after university, often you will be doing the exact same job. Like maybe it will be a little bit more difficult to get hired. And I think networking is a great tool to overcome that. But you will often be doing the exact same work. And basically the difference is the guy who comes out of university is starting the entry-level job. Whereas if you didn't go to university, you have spent 3 or 5 years doing it. You probably got a couple of promotions in the meantime, and you're going to be the boss of that guy. And when it comes to knowledge, employers know very well that like training begins on day one. So the stuff you bring from the university, and I'm talking business world here, but I think it applies to many other, like with a doctor, not so much, but in many other fields, you just start learning there. So yeah, there's not much point to it, I would say. And of course, if by regulation you have to get it, it's that kind of job, then yes. But if you don't, you might want to experiment with it, and if it doesn't work out, you can always enroll and do it the next year. But I think that through this process, and I would even say through the struggle of trying to find a job or becoming an entrepreneur, through that struggle and not being able to hide behind a diploma, that will make you better. That will make you sharper, and that will make you more aware of what's going on in the market, because you will have a chip on your shoulder, and compensating for that will make you, in the same years that it takes someone to go to college or university, it'll make you a much better, much more productive person in general.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree.
So yeah, I don't think you're really planning on ever going to college, am I right, Nick?
I am not. I'm not planning on getting my GED or anything. Uh, I'm leaving it as a possibility to get my GED if I have to. But as far as it's looking, I'm gonna try and be an entrepreneur for a while, even if what I'm doing doesn't work out. I'll try and find something new.
Yeah, yeah, and also I would add to that, being an entrepreneur, if we're talking like bigger picture here, again, you will learn much more from being an entrepreneur than being an employee. It's just I guess you have to assess where you are in when it comes to how much of a safety net you need and how much you can take, how much risk you can take, and how much of social disapproval you're comfortable with. But yeah, if you're the kind of guy who is pretty solid on those, then go for the business. That's probably the best approach. And Nick, can you tell me about your entrepreneurship?
Sure. Yeah. When I was 15, I decided my freshman year in high school, I decided I'm going to raise yaks. I figured out, okay, I want to get into agriculture. I had some family that raised cattle, and I really didn't like sheep. And there's only a few other options there. And I decided, well, you know what? I want to be different. Let's do something weird. Um, thought somehow I thought yak. Somehow it came into my head. Let's
What's a
look into
yak, Nick? What is that?
a yak is it's a Himalayan native to the Himalayan. It's a bovine. It's very similar to cattle, but it's native to the Tibetan like plateau region. You can find them in China and Nepal and Tibet and some in Mongolia as well. So they're very common there, but they're not very common anywhere else really. But there are people who are raising them here in the United States, and I don't know about Europe or anything. I think there are some people in Switzerland. But anyway, I guess let me describe what a yak looks like. It's basically a very hairy uh, cattle or cow with horns, with some larger horns. There's some breeds of cattle have very large horns, like Texas Longhorns, but most don't have large horns like yaks do. And buffalo have smaller horns as well. Buffalo have a little bit different shaped horns too. So they're kind of similar to beef and cattle, but and they also kind of have some similarities to buffalo and the different species of buffalo too. But they're most similar to taurine cattle, which is the regular cows you're going to see most of the time.
Except with a lot of fur, right?
Yeah, with a lot of fur.
Is there any connection there with mammoths? I don't know, for some reason that popped into my mind.
I don't think so. I think mammoths are more related to elephants than cattle.
Yeah, I think my my lack of knowledge in biology has just been exposed. But yeah, go on with the story.
Sure. So I decided that I want to get into that, and I found a guy who was raising them. I guess it's a couple who are raising them here in the state of Oregon, where I'm in western United States, and so I found somebody who was raising them here, and turned out they were a pretty large operation, and I decided, okay, found out where I'm going to do it. Now I got to raise $6,000 to buy my first starter herd, and that would have been a bull and maybe two pregnant cows. And I think that's about usually what you can find for $6,000. But this guy there, Pine Mountain Ranch of Bend, Oregon, they made this auction. They decided we're going to put on an auction, see what we can sell, because they were starting to downsize their herd of both buffalo and yaks. So they had a buffalo and yak auction, and my dad and I went there just to see what prices would be like, because we wanted to see maybe we could get cheaper than 6,000. And I guess yaks there's not a huge demand for live yaks. Now people really want to try the meat, but they only want one steak, and they're not gonna, there's nobody out there looking to put them in their backyard or to start raising them like I was. So these yaks were going for way under market price, for what people are trying to sell them for to other yak raisers. And so most of the time, you're not going to get a yak cow, a female yak, that's over 2 years old for under $1,300. But these guys were going for 500, 600 a head. So it was about half the price that you could usually get them. And I'm looking at my dad like, we need to get into this now. We need to buy these yaks now. And he's like, no, your mom's not going to let us do that, Nick. We can't buy these yaks right now. We don't have anywhere to put them. And well, we had fields to put them. We just didn't have enough fencing. So we're like, okay, you know what? I'll call mom, see if I can convince her to let us bring home two. And then tomorrow morning we'll go back, we'll build the fences, and then the next day we'll come back and we'll take the yaks back home. And so I've talked to my mom, say, hey, can we buy two yaks? And by that time, my dad had bought three. And so we're like, okay, let's get one more. So we bought four. We bought two bulls and two pregnant cows. So we had our starter herd. And that's how we got started with that. We went back, we brought them back, and we had some issues with fencing. Now they're all sorted out. And so I've been in the business for 2 years, I guess, now, raising yaks. And now I also have a herd of pigs. I have about 20 pigs. And I decided to raise pigs because they're you can butcher them a lot faster than yaks, so it was a little bit more of an immediate income stream, which I was looking for because the yaks take about 2 years to mature, and it's just they're not as quickly breeding as the pigs are.
You definitely tricked your mom there.
Mm-hmm.
How did
Yes.
did you say two and showed up with four, or how did that?
Yeah, we said 2, and then we showed up with 4.
How did
And
that play out?
she wasn't very happy, but she didn't tell us bring him back. So we kept going with it. And yeah, she wasn't too upset. Now she's used to them.
Right. And is this do you personally own these yaks? Like how is the separation between your business and like your parents' business? How does that work?
Yeah, I had the loan. I had to get a loan from them. It was about $2,400, I think. So I had to get a loan from them at first, but I paid that back fairly quickly through just working random jobs and through raising other animals in 4-H. So I was able to do that. So I think I share a herd right now. I have a partner who owns half of the herd, and I own the other half. We have about 12 yaks together. So my business partner, Tyler Boggs of Heart to Heart Farms, very interesting guy, but he boards here with us. So I think we have 12 yaks. He owns 5. I own 7 at this point. I think that's what its split is, but I don't remember. So that's what we're at now, and that's kind of how it works. Is I own half the herd, he owns half, and none of the yaks are my parents. I don't think. I think I paid off everything so far.
Right. And did you grow up on a farm in a rural area or
Yeah, I've lived on this farm for my whole life, basically. But my parents didn't raise any animals. We had some cousins that used the pastures that we have. They raise cattle, so it's been a family thing. This whole area, we've been here since the early 1900s. Was maybe that history is not very impressive in Europe, but here it's a long time to have your family own the same property. So yeah, we've had this property for a long time, but we haven't really used it for agricultural purposes. We just haven't really used the land as much until I started up with the farming and ranching.
so so you didn't have did you have experience in it or was it something you learned on the spot there?
I had a little bit of experience working with animals through 4-H programs. You guys probably don't have that in Europe at all, but it's a, I don't know how to explain it very well, but I think it's subsidized by the government, but there's not a lot of money that comes to anybody through these 4-H programs. But basically, you raise an animal to what the market demands are kind of looking for. They don't really teach you about the economics of it and why you're feeding these animals these kinds of grains and why you're feeding them out like this. But they just kind of teach you this is what a pretty animal looks like. This is what the people are looking. This is what a judge wants to see, and those are just kind of industry standards for a well-fed and well-exercised animal. So I had some experience doing that, but it's a very different kind of agricultural process, and the methods are very different from what I'm doing now with the yaks and the hogs.
And are your parents entrepreneurial?
Um, Not entirely. My mother works for the Department of Forestry here in Oregon, so she's not very entrepreneurial. My dad was an engineer for a while, and then he started up a school. And then he also, I think there's still him and another business partner are running a consulting business on how to start up charter schools. So he has some experience running like a small business that's not, didn't supplement his whole income, right? But he had some side hustles, I guess, going. But yeah, other than that, not very much.
So yeah, I mean, I'll tell you the reason I'm kind of probing here, and it's always a question that's interesting to me, like what makes an entrepreneur? And I'm kind of trying to find it, and I tell you, I don't know, maybe I was surrounded by the wrong people, but you were 15 when you started this business, right? Am I correct? 15?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember I'm 23 now. I remember I was 15. It's kind of a more urban environment. Nobody that I knew would have said, okay, I'm 15. I will start a business. Like everybody would be like, I'm too young, I'm too inexperienced, I can't do this, blah, 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 blah. So did you Did you feel this at all, or what was the secret sauce? What do you think?
Well, most of my drive for making the business work and getting into this is trying to. I didn't want to be in school, and I once I got out of school, and I guess while I was kind of starting the business while I was in school, I was worried. You know, I kind of had some of those thoughts like, am I going to be able to do this? Is this going to work? What am I going to do if it doesn't? I was worried for a little while, but um after I got out of school and as I started working with it more, you know, I have gotten more confident, I guess. But I think the main thing that was driving me when I first started to and decided to start it was to get out of school and do something that I enjoyed. That was kind of the idea because I knew that I didn't like school, and I knew that there wasn't really any job that I would enjoy. I kind of wanted to be a lawyer for a while, but then I kind of decided, well, I don't think I want to do that either. So when I found out that agriculture was something that I really enjoyed, um, I kind of decided, well, I have to make this work, and why not do it now? You know, like, sure, no, I'm not experienced, but I've got a few years in my parents' custodies to be able to fall back on. You know, I'll be fine if my business doesn't start out working, you know, right away. I have some time to make this work and try it out. So I might as well start right now. So that was my thought process and deciding to do it when I was 15.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. I mean, honestly, I think any like I think that biologically speaking, most people are ready to start at 13, 14, 15 with work or entrepreneurship, and just kind of, well, social norms push that out a whole decade into the future sometimes, and it's just, I think it's a loss. I think it's a loss because there's so much value that can be gained from work. And yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at some of the history of humans, right? I don't know how much it really was beyond some of the I guess, but about like 200 years ago, even maybe 100 years ago, um, younger people started working at a very early age. Um, and there are a lot of people here in the United States back when, you know, we were expanding. I don't like to say we, but, you know, back when settlers were expanding to the West and taking over the Native American territory, right? Um, a lot of the kids were at 16 were starting up their own homesteads, you know. Um, and maybe not a lot, but there were at least some, right? And you can read the stories about these people who, and it was a normal thing. It seemed it didn't nobody like really pointed out this kid was 16 and living on his own. No, no, he was just starting up his own family, right? And you know you can argue maybe you shouldn't start a family at 16, but starting a business at 16, there's not much harm in doing that, right? And it really is a benefit, and you can see that there have been much younger people than me, right? And me and you starting up doing their own thing at a much younger age throughout history, right? So I think that, you know, I think it's an ability that people don't realize that they have, and maybe it's been, you know, kind of driven out through different things like school and maybe affluence, but um, you know, it kind of surprises you how much you can do if you really decide that you can, right? And I think that is something that a lot of people, a lot of cultures have lost, especially in the West.
yeah. And I think I've read that like on a traditional farm, children would usually start helping out, I think at 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So, so
Hmm.
now the fact that now you have people at 25 after a master's degree using sometimes doing jobs that are pretty similar to that, like for like basic manual jobs is kind of it's funny, but it's also tragic. uh,
Sure.
yeah, I think, well, part of it is of course regulation, but yeah, and part of it is social norm. And I hope this is something that reverses in the future. I don't know
Yeah.
how that's gonna happen, but
Well, I do think, I mean, I don't know. I am not an economist, and I don't know how to read forecasts in the economy very well. But it would make sense to me that there's going to be a shift where the people who are working hard are going to have an advantage. And I mean, I'm not going to say that college students aren't working hard, but they're not doing the same kind of they're not actually in the workforce, I guess. So I think people that are more experienced and are able to make it in this economy, and if people who have been there for a long time and not in higher education and being in school for the first 30 years or first 25 years of their life, I think they're going to have people who are starting up businesses and people who are working um, in the workforce at an earlier age are going to have an advantage over people who don't. I'm not going to have $30,000 to $60,000 of student loans to pay off. I have a very clear advantage over many of my peers because of that. And in Europe's a little bit different, and we might see the change here in the United States that college tuition will be starting to be paid by the government, but we'll see. But even in these situations where tuition is being paid by the government, you're still going to have people who don't take the opportunity to go to school and higher education. They're going to have more time and experience under their belt, like we've been talking about. They'll be in the workforce and they'll know what to do because they've been there, right? So I think there's a possibility that this change could happen. I'm optimistic, I guess, but I honestly, I don't know.
Yeah, I think part of it, part of it, or a big part of it, comes through parenting, and the better parented children are, I believe, the sooner they will realize their actual, like the more, how can I put it, the more in sync they will be with their biology insofar as where they really are. And I loved Joshua Sheets' podcast. He has, I don't know if you've heard it, but he has one on I actually discovered you through an interview with him. But yeah, it's radicalpersonalfinance.com, and he has one on how to, I'm not exactly sure about the title, but the idea is how to teach work skill, like job skills, to your 8-year-old. That's the kind of approach that we're looking for here. And it's totally realistic. You listen to the podcast and it's not a joke. It's really for 8-year-olds. Yeah. So another thing that I wanted to ask you on self-education is, I know you have, or you're working on a plan. So could you tell me more about that? And also how it just day to day, how it fits into your life. Like, I know you're working and you're busy doing the podcast and everything else. So
Sure.
how do you schedule education?
Yeah, so the requirement that my parents gave me to be able to get out of school was to make a plan, a self-education plan. And so I wrote out this thing, kind of laying out what I was going to do and how it was going to help me learn. And having that plan was very useful in the beginning, but I found that I don't go back to it very often. And there are definitely things in the plan that have changed. I still have this idea of what I want to do, and I kind of, if I need to, I will go back to the plan that I wrote out a few years. I guess it was about a year ago. It's been when yeah, okay. So I can go back to it and see, but most of the time I don't follow that plan very strictly. I just kind of have these ideas of where I'm going to go with this business. I have some shorter term plans and goals that I haven't put into the plan. But I'm all trying to work towards this main goal of being financially independent as soon as I can, and I'm hoping that I can do that by 25. That's what I laid out in the self-education plan, that I'm going to be financially stable, able to live a comfortable lifestyle without having to really struggle to get cash or any income. Right? That's what my goal is. So I'm working through that, and I've learned a lot in the last like 6 months about productivity and just business techniques in general that I'm kind of using more so than the plan. And but yeah, hopefully I think did I answer your question? Is that what you're looking for, or do you want some more detail?
Well, tell me more. That's so it's part of the question, and the other part is how it fits into your day-to-day life.
Okay, sure. I guess fits in somewhat because I'm working on these ideas that I laid out. Like I want to make this yak meat business work. I'm also going to try and get dairy started eventually. I'm working on this hog business. I have all these things that I'm working on, and that's mostly how it plays into it is I laid out what my goals are, and I try to keep those in mind as best as I can. And I usually don't go back to the plan and look at it. I think even I talked to Joshua Sheets about this, and he kind of said, people, if you look at businesses, having a business plan, most businesses who make a business plan are going to succeed at least compared to businesses that don't. Um, but the thing is if you ask these people 5 years later, or you know later on after they started the business and it's become successful, um, you ask them how often do they go back to the business plan that they wrote out in the beginning, and oftentimes they don't go back to it very often. So that has been my experience, is that I just haven't needed to go back to that plan, and so I don't very often. But it was very useful to structure my goals and lay out, this is what I want to do with my life. This is what I want to do with my education. And just keeping those goals in mind has been very helpful. And I don't think I would have been able to keep them in mind if I hadn't wrote them out there in the beginning about a year ago.
Yeah, I have a very similar experience with this insofar as at one point I've clarified my kind of big picture goals and needs and what I'm looking for, but day to day I'm actually working with it's with 1 month plans. I'm actually working with rolling 1 month plans, and at the beginning of every month I pull it up and I kind of, in a sense, go to ground zero and see how things have changed. And sometimes I drop goals that are no longer relevant, and that has been very valuable to me. Now, of course, I'm guessing that this is specific to my life at the moment. Like if I were raising yaks, I'm sure that you have to have a longer time frame there. But
Yeah, sure.
yeah, but still, it makes sense to me that the plan, at least in its original form, is only the beginning of the journey, and it's gonna keep on changing all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to your education, your self-education, do you do you have some sorts of habits built around it, like certain times of day or certain things that you will do on certain days, or is it something that you're doing in a less planned way?
It's typically not very planned. I'd like to structure it more. I'm starting out with some techniques like the Pomodoro technique, trying to structure how much you work. You work, a given amount of time. Maybe it's 25 minutes. Take a short break. Come back to it. There's some studies and people who say that'll make you more productive if you take those breaks and you work in these, allotted time segments, I guess. So I'm starting to get more into that, and that's something that I'd like to work on more, to structure, what I'm doing a little bit more, because I feel like that'll help me be more productive. It seems that as I've added more structure into my life and the way I go, with the business and the education, it has been very helpful. So right now, the most structure that I do is I have my 1 day a week where I focus only on podcasting, which is Wednesday. So I allow myself to, spend a whole lot of time editing and doing anything that I want about the podcast instead of the farm. I don't do anything for the farm except for, daily things I have to do on Wednesdays. And then every day when I get up, I try to have this kind of breakfast routine and routine through the day. So at about 8:30 in the morning, I wake up, I go milk goats with my dad. That's his sort of thing, not my part of the business. But so we go out and we milk the goats, and then I come in, I make myself dinner, or I mean breakfast, and then I kind of plan my day. I write down the things I want to get done today, and I prioritize them with an A and a B. A's I have to get done today. B's are things that I want to get done, but I can push off if I need to, right? So that's kind of how much I structure my day. Other than that, it can be random. I don't have a certain amount of things I do every week. It just depends on what I think of during that day. But I would like to add some more structure to that, because I think that my productivity is not at its not at the place where I think it could be, I guess.
You probably will never reach that place.
Yeah, it's probably true.
It's a moving goalpost, but it makes a lot of sense to me, your approach, and it is my experience too that structure is very important, but it has to be built gradually, and there is such a thing as too much structure too soon. And once you achieve comfort with certain level of structure, and you gain the confidence in knowing that, yeah, I can stick to this, no problem, then you can layer it a little bit on top and stretch yourself further and further. I think what scares some people off of structure is that they get a book like, I don't know, Eat That Frog, or have you read Eat That Frog?
I have not.
Brian Tracy. It's time management, or Getting Things Done by David Allen, and they try to do it all at once, and they can't. It's too much. They don't have the skill in I don't know, in time management, in building habits, and then they predictably fail, and they say, well, I'm just not a structured guy, and I'm a free spirit, and all those things, but they lose out.
Sure. Yeah, I think that, yeah, that's very accurate in my opinion. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, is slowly get more structure and try to slowly take on a little bit more responsibility, making sure I don't go too fast, because if you do, it's very easy to get stressed out, and then you actually lose productivity in the long run, which is not fun. It's not fun to have too much stress in your life. So I like to make sure I have enough time for myself, and to do the things that I enjoy, that I don't get paid for, right? To not work, I guess. So I like to have that time, but also making sure that you are being productive with the time that you do a lot for productivity. That's kind of what I'm shooting for.
Yeah, and I think that's great. What I really like is you're practicing self-respect, and you're practicing gentleness towards yourself in the process. You're not going for perfectionism from the start, and I think that's
Right.
a very healthy approach. So yeah, last topic. It's, I think, an interesting one. Some of the listeners will be very, very, very familiar with philosophy and how it relates to life and how it can be useful, but I believe others will have no clue, and it's kind of, they will say, philosophy, why study that? What's the point? That's all esoteric. I want to be in the real world. So I know that you focus a lot on philosophy, both in your own education and in your own podcast. Why is that? And what's the value that philosophy can bring to people directly in their personal life?
Yeah, sure. I've been really interested in philosophy, and I guess since I was about I think I was 6. I don't know. I think maybe I was 15. I don't know. But I got into philosophy just kind of trying to figure out how things work, because I was interested in the truth, I guess. I just wanted to be right and make sure that what I was saying was accurate. And so I started studying philosophy and making sure that I did know what I was talking about. And as you study philosophy, you kind of realize, okay, there's a lot that I don't know about. So maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but you can kind of have some things to stand on. So that's been kind of what my journey was, is trying to figure out how to structure my beliefs. So the way I look at things is there are about 5 branches of philosophy, 5 main branches. I think Ayn Rand lays this out with her philosophy of objectivism. I believe that there are other ancient Greek philosophers who lay out philosophy in this 5 branches. The 5 branches are epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, politics, and aesthetics. So epistemology is the study of basic human knowledge, or the study of knowledge. Metaphysics is the study of reality, and maybe my definitions are not exactly spot on, but this is basically what it is. And the ethics is studying how to live a good life, basically, and politics is getting people to follow your ethics, basically, whatever your ethical beliefs are. And then aesthetics is studying, what is beauty, what is aesthetically pleasing, all these sort of things, right? Kind of going into, I guess it's not that important. We can leave aesthetics to the side because that's not what I'm going to talk about. But I kind of realized, okay, well, my political beliefs really are centered in my ethical beliefs. So I better make sure that whatever I believe in ethics is pretty strong, because if I think that my politics is strong, then I don't really know unless my ethics are strong. Because if I have bad ethics, then you have bad politics. Because if your politics are based on your ethics, then, right, I think that makes sense. And then I kind of realized, well, to know what a good life is, you kind of have to have some basic understanding of reality and people, right? You got to understand how the world works and how all these different things work. How does physics and science? You got to know something about science, so you get into metaphysics, and then you kind of realize, well, I got to even know more. Where does this all start? What is human knowledge? What is all this stuff? Then you get into epistemology. So all of those branches of philosophy really play off of each other. So if you're going to talk about politics, you better know ethics, and if you're going to talk about ethics, you better know about metaphysics and epistemology. So that's kind of how I came at it, and that's it's very helpful to have these foundations in philosophy to be able to make sure that you're living in, that what you're espousing, what you're promoting, what you're believing is accurate. So that's kind of where I started with it. And then I kind of realized philosophy has some very practical everyday things, even if you're not interested in having a very accurate political philosophy. In my everyday life, I found that philosophies like Stoicism were very helpful. And there are other philosophical tools you can use that are very helpful, like the trivium method of critical thinking. Hopefully I'm not talking too much here, Philip. I don't I feel like I can ramble sometimes, and hopefully I'm answering your question in concise enough ways. I guess I don't remember what your question was even. What was your question? Sorry.
Oh, you answered it. It was the value of philosophy in everyday life. But you know what?
Okay.
Can you give me an example? So let's say that I'm a really practical guy, and I don't care too much about politics. I don't, people say things, I don't care so much. And I also don't, I'm not a big one for theoretical ideas. Is there still value for me in philosophy in this case?
I think there absolutely is. If you want to have any kind of basic understanding of how the world works, I think it's appropriate to have a foundation in logic and reasoning skills, which are very important in philosophy, and that's really where these ideas stem from. So having a grounding in philosophy is going to help you a lot. But even if that's not necessarily what you're interested in, I think there are some very practical philosophies, and the one that I'm a huge fan of Stoicism because of how much it's influenced my life. In I guess basically, this is related to ethics mostly. I think everybody is really trying to live a good life, right? We're all trying to live our life to the best we can, and some people have different strategies. Some strategies work better than others. But if you really are dedicated to having a beneficial life, a life that you enjoy, then you better study how to do that. And that's what ethics is, right? And for me, finding out how to live a good life was extremely beneficial. And that's how I found Stoicism. And the idea behind Stoicism is to live according to nature or to fate. So that's their idea of how you live a good life, is to live accordance to fate or nature. So whatever happens, they recognize that you can't control what's going to happen. So take it as it goes, right? Whatever happens in life, don't let it negatively affect you, because you can't control it. So why care that much? You just have to take things as they go, because otherwise you're just going to let it upset you, and you're not really going to get anywhere with it. It's more useful just to take things as they are, and just live life. Just go for it. That's kind of where that is what I would say. I hope that answers that.
And someone interested, let's say you sparked someone's interest, but they never studied philosophy and never cared about it before. Where should they start? What would be a good resource? I know your channel is your podcast is a very good resource. Is
Sure.
there a specific episode?
That's a good question, and I can't remember what the episode was, but I'd like to go back and kind of work. I do, every once in a while, what I've done with this show is I've ran through the foundations of philosophy, starting with epistemology. But I think because as I go, right, I change my mind. So since the last time I've written on and did a show on epistemology, I think my mind has changed. And I don't remember what episode that is. But if you go to my website and you go to, if you can find the categories, and you go to my foundations categories, you can find all the shows I've done related to my foundations in philosophy. I would recommend that. I don't remember how to find that. It could be and-yak.com/categories, but I don't remember actually. It could be /foundations.
We'll put a link. We'll put a link in the description.
So that would be something I would recommend. Other than that, I picked up a lot of this by talking to random people on the internet. Really, that's how I kind of learned my basics in philosophy. So I don't really have fantastic resources for getting down into the nitty-gritty of foundations of philosophy like I have done, because I just did that kind of on my own, talking to other people, picking up things from certain people and running with them and doing all that sort of random kind of guerrilla scholar warrior sort of thing, as who's that guy who put the Prof CJ of the Dangerous History Project? He says guerrilla scholar warrior, that's his term. But I would recommend Philosophize This by Stephen West. That's a really good podcast that goes through kind of the history of philosophy, starting with some very ancient Greek philosophies. He goes into some of the Eastern philosophies too. Those are really good to see kind of the history of thoughts, but I don't think that that's something you should stick with if you want to adopt your own philosophy. I think that really what it takes is to be a critical thinker and to try and find this information on your own. And it is kind of hard, but I would eventually, I guess I would say I'd like to be a better resource, to have the podcast be a better resource for that. But at the moment, I don't think I'm a fantastic resource. I think that I do have some good episodes on philosophy, but I think that there are I feel like there are other things that I'm missing and I'm not thinking of right off the top of my head. So there might be better resources, but I'm not thinking of them right now.
Yeah, so you heard it, people. Follow Nick and pressure him into making more on philosophy. Well, Nick, thanks for coming on the show. I know you've said it already, but can you please repeat where people can find you and what kind of projects you have going on right now?
Sure. I'm about to start a series on sort of the little things that I try to remember, and kind of taking because I like the way you do your shows most of the time. They've been very short, under 45 minutes, although this is definitely an exception. But I'd like to start doing that. Little things I try to remember related to kind of basic philosophy of how I try to live my life, my own life. So that's something that I think is going to be exciting and will be interesting. But you can find that as it's coming out on an-yak.com, an-yak.com. That's where the anarcho-yakitalism podcast is hosted. But you can also find that on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and the Liberty Radio Network at lrn.fm. That's where you can search up, find Liberty Radio Network. I play on there at some point. It might be in the middle of the night for some people, but I don't remember exactly when they play my show. But you can find it on pretty much any podcast catcher. If you have a program or an app that catches RSS feeds, then you can probably find it just by looking up the Anarcho-Yakitalism podcast or Nick Hazelton and Yaks. And that's pretty much how you can find me.
So that was the interview. I hope you found a lot of value in it. I definitely recommend checking Nick's work out. he's definitely someone to consume and also look out for what kind of new stuff he's going to come out with. A lot of books and podcasts and resources have been mentioned throughout the interview, and I did my best putting links to them in the description on the Value and Growth website. You can find the episode at valueandgrowth.com/E21, as in episode 21. And where the links point to books, these are affiliate links. So if you click through them and purchase within, I think, 24 hours, I get a small percentage of the price. Thank you for listening to the Value and Growth podcast, and I dare you to flourish today.